Welcome, everyone. It is 1:30, and this is the Tuesday, January 25th, 2022 Board of Commissioners meeting. And at this point, I'm going to ask fellow Commissioner, Mr. Hopler, to introduce someone very special for our invocation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce to you my son, pastor of Covenant Life Church in Grand Haven. Two of you go to his church, so you know him. But Marshall Hopler, and he's going to open with prayer for us this morning. Thanks.
All rise.
Before we pray, just to give you a quick little, this isn't 3 points, it's not going to be 20 minutes, but I was asked by my father to be here, and Phil and Roger are part of my church, so it's a blessing and an honor to be here with you this morning. I live in Grand Haven Township. I work at Covenant Life Church on First and Columbus, right in the middle of Covenant Life. Something unique about our church is that we have a wood shop on the 3rd floor. We've made over, Roger, I don't even know how many, thousands of bunk beds for children who are in need in Grand Haven and Muskegon. And when COVID hit, like many of you, we pivoted and made desks, over 150 some desks for children who were in need and didn't have desks in their homes. I know the goal of your board is to serve the community, and like Covenant Life Church, it's been really hard, hasn't it? It's been tiring, hasn't it? And the things people have said about you guys, the way that they've talked about you, the way that but you're here to serve the community. And I want to encourage you to continue to do that. And I have been praying for you, and I will continue to pray for you as you serve Ottawa County and the needs of the people within this community. So let's join together in prayer at this time. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this afternoon that we can gather together. I pray, Lord, that you would bless this board as they serve Ottawa County, as they serve the community of humans and people who live within this community. I just pray simply, Lord, that you would give them strength to do your will, calm their hearts to listen well, even those who disagree with their decisions. Give them peace to move forward in faith. Give them grace to carry on each new day. And we simply say, we love you, Jesus. We pray all these things in your name alone. And all of God's servants say, amen.
Please remain standing.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will you call the roll, please?
Sir, Mr. Garcia. Here. Mr. Baumann. Here. Mr. Zylstra. Here. Mr. Dannenberg. Here. Mr. Meppeling. Here. Mr. Terpstra. Here. Mr. Holtfloor. Here. Mr. DeYoung. Here. Mr. Kyers. Here. Mr. Bergman. Here. And Mr. Fensky.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Next is presentation of petitions and communications.
None from us.
At this time, we would have an introduction of our public defender, Nicole Youngsma Dirks.
Yeah, I just want to preface that by saying, as you know, Bob Hamilton retired as our public defender, I believe back on January 7th. And Nicole's been acting as our first assistant public defender for just over 3 years and has done a fantastic job. Has received a lot of support from within the office and just shows a real passion for criminal defense work. And I think will be just a great person to lead the public defender's office. She has agreed to discard all of her Ohio State apparel. She was so that was a condition of employment, which she signed unknowingly. So anyway, Nicole.
Well, thank you so much.
How do we hire Jason?
I.O.
The Parks Department's very interested in what you just said.
Yeah.
He's all upset.
So my Ohio State credentials make me very qualified to lead a department of anarchists. No, just truly I'm so excited to be in this role, and I thank you for the opportunity. I'm very humbled to serve our community in this way as well. I was really touched by the invocation because it really describes a lot of our work as well. We are working with the least of these who live in Ottawa County, who are charged with crimes, and try to help them. And they come to us with every problem, not just legal issues. And we hope to address both their legal situation with just elite representation of them in the court system, but also to help provide them services and connect them within our community, because the lion's share of these folks are all going to be returned to the community and need to do so with support. We have a really excellent team of folks, and I hope to just empower them, help let their light shine. They're really wonderful people to work with and really excellent attorneys who provide great service. Just regarding our department, we were recently able to hire the preeminent social worker in the state of Michigan. She is an MSW. Her name is Alyssa Gunderson, and she is helping us fulfill that mission that we came to before with the idea of having a holistic defense approach. She can help us with things like connecting folks with housing, food insecurity, just all kinds of things within the community. And she's just been a real asset in just a few weeks on the job. So those are some of the exciting things we have going on in our department. I just thank you for the opportunity to serve as public defender. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Before we go into public comment, I'm going to make a few statements, and before every board meeting, that's just something that I've decided to do. And so I want to welcome everyone again that are present and online. All residents of Ottawa County should have received our first county newsletter. We are planning to send out this type of newsletter on a semi-annual basis to keep everyone informed. And I want to thank the public for reading it. And we would certainly appreciate any sort of feedback that you could share with your commissioner in particular. Ottawa County continues to be the fastest growing county in the state of Michigan. County commissioners want to thank all of our county employees for their dedication, their commitment, and their hard work. I think the pastor mentioned that it hasn't been easy times, and our county employees certainly have stepped up and continually do the work that is asked of them in providing services to this county. Ottawa County is special specifically because it's safe. Quality of life, it's faith-based community, diverse population, strong agriculture, low unemployment rate, and an abundance of water resources. As you know, Ottawa County has received $57 million from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 that will be used to fund projects that will enhance the lives of Ottawa County residents. Projects will include social and human service needs, affordable housing, business stabilization needs, just to name a few. Even though we continue to be in this pandemic, I want to stress, and the commission wants to stress, love and kindness are the most important. And let us be reminded and grateful for this environment that we live in here in Ottawa County, where you belong. Thank you. At this time, we're going to open it up to public comment. And if you would assist Clerk Robach.
Yes, sir. First public comment we have is from Patrick Sisler. And excuse me, Mr. Chair and members of the commission, we seem to have an issue with our timer, on our on-screen timer, which is kind of a handy little reminder. So I apologize, but I'll say something, Pat, at 3 minutes. I'll wave my hand or something.
All right, sounds good. Patrick Sisler, residence at 6051 Butternut Drive, West Olive, 49460. Many of you know me in my professional capacity as Executive Director of Community Spoke, but I am here today to give public comment on behalf of the other nonprofit I have the privilege of leading in this community, which is the Lakeshore Nonprofit Alliance. We are a network of over 180 local nonprofits. And so I will be reading a letter that was written jointly from some key leaders of some key nonprofit organizations that you will find in front of you that was handed out ahead of time. Dear Ottawa County Commissioners, we, the executive directors representing the nonprofit organizations, list at the end of this letter write to strongly support the Ottawa County Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The work of this office is necessary to ensure we in Ottawa County live up to our vision, where you belong. In order to best support the important work of DEI, we commit to doing our part to support this vision of belonging and ensure each community resident we serve through our multiple community organizations feel that they belong here in Ottawa County. We also believe it is important to recognize that DEI efforts are meant to address bias and barriers for all marginalized segments of our society. As leaders who work in the nonprofit sector, our work directly impacts those who are most in need of knowing this is the place they belong. That includes people of different socioeconomic levels, many of whom struggle to meet their basic needs of food and housing. It includes those whose primary language isn't English, who don't fit inside traditional boxes of gender and sexuality, and who find themselves up against a glass ceiling of sexism or the closed door of ageism. It includes those who live with disabilities, some since birth, some brought on by accident, others by age. It includes those who live with mental illness, those who are returned to society after spending time incarcerated, and those who struggle with substance use disorders and other addictions. It is also critical that DEI initiatives includes people of color who have different racial or ethnic identities. We specifically applaud the county's recent efforts focused on addressing racism in all its forms and encourage you to continue that important work. We also encourage the county to continue to view DEI broadly. If we truly aspire to be a place where each person feels they belong, we must be willing to tackle all of the elements of DEI. It is essential to recognize that when any one segment of our population, or for that matter, any one person in our county is excluded, we are all at risk of exclusion. Whenever we fail to celebrate any segment or any person in our county, we deprive ourselves of the rich reward gifts that are ours. When one suffers, we all suffer. In order to live in the vision of where you belong, we commit to the hard work of continuing to try to identify and understand our own bias wherever they exist. We seek to widen our lens to see our community through the eyes of all of our neighbors, and we take responsibility for our role in ensuring each person we serve feels that they belong after interacting with our organizations. On June 9, 2020, the County Commission stated, for our region to be safe and welcoming, it must be a place where everyone, regardless of similarities or differences, can experience this personally. We agree with you that efforts of DEI are necessary for our safety and prosperity. We also desire to see quality of life maximized for all future generations of residents. Our work confirms every day that the power of belonging contributes to an individual's resilience, their productivity and engagement levels, and their ability to give back. These are all factors that lead to the health and wellness of a vibrant, thriving community. You have stated Ottawa County is where you belong. We honor your commitment to the statement to ensuring each community resident indeed feels as if they belong here. We fully support our tax dollars allocated to the important work of DEI office. We see the human and economic value to our community of these critical efforts and ask that you strongly consider the value and impact of this office and these efforts as you seek to fill the opening for county administrator. We are committed to supporting you where you belong vision. And I won't read the list of names, but you can see some of the leaders of some prominent nonprofits that have jointly come together to write this letter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick.
We have no other in-person public comment at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We will move on to the approval of our agenda. So we'll entertain a motion for that approval.
Hello.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Sir, Mr. Kyers. Yes. Mr. Holfluer.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Meppeling.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Actions and reports.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent resolutions 1 through 2.
Support.
Is there any further discussion on consent items? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Meppeling.
Yes.
Mr. Holfluer.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
We have no public hearings, and so we'll move into our action items. And from Health and Human Services Committee, Commissioner Dannenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the letter of supporting authorization West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum to apply for the Michigan Materials Management County Engagement Grant with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy on behalf of Ottawa County. Mr. Chairman, I see we have Deb Walters online, and I think I'm gonna like to turn it over to her. Am I correct on that, Kim?
Yep, I can answer any questions that you
Yes,
guys
you're
might
muted.
have. I'm still muted, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
There we go. Yeah, so we're here to present, I'm remote because my son got called in from daycare, so. But I believe Daniel Shoemaker, who represents the West Michigan Sustainability Business Forum, is there present for any questions specifically towards that item, as well as, I'll go over the general concept. It is, they're requesting to represent us as well as several other counties for a essentially partnership and data collection through several other counties for the state. The state is trying to collect data ahead of time and partnerships ahead of time for a revision of the law that's been being worked on for Part 115. The goal of their Project Eagle is to create partnerships and to collect data.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Sir, would you like to add some dialogue to that, or maybe commissioners, if you have questions?
I'm available to answer questions, and I think the only thing I would add is that we're through this process looking to support Kim's team as well as the other counties we're working with to better enable sustainable materials management, improve prosperity and business performance within the county, and to help municipalities better access the services that the county is offering and the opportunities the state currently has available.
So does this have to do with the current potential changes to Part 115, where we go from almost a solid waste management plan to a materials management plan, and the state's looking to collect data to help with that legislative process? Is that?
Partially. So it is philosophically and spiritually aligned with that. It is in its current concept leaning towards more voluntary participation, with an understanding that the legislative action may be several years away, and at this moment is more hypothetical. It is unlikely this material will be used in the crafting of the legislation. It's intended to be more of a voluntary pathway to accomplish the same activities that Part 115 would compel if it were passed in its current form.
Yep, that's my understanding as well.
Quote me, tell me if I'm wrong or not, but this was a little bit to do with also getting industry of how much they are recycling into the system. And right now, we in Ottawa County, we keep track of what we recycle, but we don't know what the industry out there is. Am I correct on that?
That will be a component of it. We're hopeful to engage all stakeholders in the community, and there are a lot of knowledge gaps as far as what level of participation is with industry, and we're hoping to get participation from both the public and private sector.
Yeah, one thing too that I'll add just to help clarify something.
Any other questions, gentlemen?
Is it muted? Oh,
Thank you much.
Thank you.
We have A motion on the floor, and we have a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Meffelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. From Planning and Policy, Commissioner DeYoung.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the item of the Explorer Trail, I move to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the bid from Apex Contractors in the amount of $967,262.50 to enter into a contract for construction of the Grand Ravines to Grand River Park segment of the Item Explorers Trail.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would you gentlemen care for some explanation from Parks? We have a number of items, so you might be up there for a bit, Jason.
Good afternoon. So this is a segment that connects Grand Ravines to Grand River Park. I think it'll be one of our most exciting segments there of the Greenway Trail. So it'll connect two of Grand Ravines is one of our busiest parks, and then Grand River Park really will, I think we'll see a whole lot more use there. So Apex is a company that we've used before, and yeah.
Questions?
Jason, as I looked at the map, Jason, are we planning on doing that trail along the river or is it along the road?
It's along the river.
Okay.
So, and then there's a little spur that comes off to the park.
Any other questions? We have a motion by DeYoung and second by Bergman. Will you call the roll, please?
Sir, Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Meffelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes,
Motion passes.
Regarding the Eastmanville Farms Management License, I move to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the management license agreement between Ottawa County Parks Commission and Mr. Dave Kulikamp, manager, that will convey upon the manager the rights to manage specific portions of the Eastmanville Farms property in a specific manner as outlined in the license agreement and its attachments for a period of 10 years.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Can I give a little summary on this one too?
Certainly. So this is a unique property on the north side of the Grand River. So it was originally in the county's possession as the Poor Farm. And then as the county transitioned away from it being the Poor Farm, the parks took over the operation of it. And 20 years ago, the West Michigan Agricultural Education Organization formed, and they operated it as a nonprofit trying to put together educational opportunities for the public. So as that lease is nearing its end, we've worked with them, and they're not interested in continuing that. So as we were preparing how to transition it out of that leasing agreement, we were kind of faced with, well, what do we do with these row crops? So this is really a unique opportunity for us to look at reducing our cost. So to transition from row crops to a grassland area can be pretty pricey to seed and to do the planting. And then this is an opportunity for us to kind of look at establishing a management agreement, looking at a local farmer to come in and fulfill those management obligations, use grazing as that management style. And it's a really pretty creative opportunity. And then he qualifies then for some grant funding that we wouldn't. So, yeah.
Any further questions for Jason? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Hofler,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Meppling,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the consolidate motor vehicle permit fees, I move to approve the recommendation of the Parks and Recreation Commission to adjust the motor vehicle parking fee to establish one daily motor vehicle fee of $8.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Commissioner,
I have a question, Jason, I forgot to ask on Tuesday. Are these parks open during winter hours? Tunnel Park, Kirk Park? So there is a daily fee for right now as well.
So the fees are only from Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Thank
And then tunnel, like some of our parks we close, but they always have pedestrian access. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
any other questions, commissioners? We have a motion, DeYoung, and second by Dannenberg. Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Meppling,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Hofler,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the naming of North Stearns Park, I move to approve naming the newly acquired area of Stearns Creek Park north of Stearns Creek as a Hillstrom Family Natural Area, and to name the proposed trails as the Hillstrom Family Trail System, and to provide exclusive naming rights to any future trails and overlooks on this property.
Support. Jason?
yes, so this was the Stearns expansion acquisition, and working with this foundation and funders. This was a request from them to secure the funding, and the board has a formality of approving namings for substantial commitments or contributions that help acquire a property, or for commitments of individuals who have made a commitment to or contribution to the county or the Parks Commission. So they have helped fund over 5 years the majority, or almost 50% of the acquisition cost of this property. So.
Any questions for Jason? Seeing none?
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Meppling,
Yes.
Mr. Hofler,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the proposed amendments to section 400.5, I move to approve the proposed amendments to section 400.5 of the county operations ordinance.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Would you like to kind of explain this, Mr. Shea?
Well, I'll give a brief summary and then I'll turn it over to our corporation counsel. But we had a lawsuit filed against us, and Judge Miedema essentially ruled against us that we cannot regulate drones, but we can regulate a person's behavior or conduct that's using a drone. And so the attempt here is to revise our ordinance that basically says, instead of saying, hey, you simply can't just fly drones over county property, and we're talking about county owned property, county facilities, not the county in general. For example, you can't drop or cause to be dropped any type of material or device from a drone, and you can't harass people with the drone. So it's really, I think Doug said it best, you're truly trying to regulate people's behavior using drones as opposed to an outright prohibition on the use of drones over county property. Is that a fair way to characterize that?
Yeah, you know, anytime you have a new technology, which we have with drones, and you get new legislation, you have a lot of questions. And the regulations, the statute basically said you can't, if you're a county, city, and township, you can't regulate drone usage unless you're expressly authorized to do that. And our argument in front of Judge Miedema was that we're only regulating the activity above our own property, and therefore it shouldn't be covered by the act. She disagreed with that, but in the process, she answered some questions. Just because you have the right to fly drones over county property doesn't mean that you should never be able to do anything you want with the drones. So she said, we can regulate the use of drones by people. So you're not really regulating the drone, you're regulating the people. So that's, as John has alluded to, that's what the ordinance amendments do. They conform our ordinance to Judge Miedema's opinion and her injunction. In the process, we picked up some things. So like with the jail, the juvenile detention has a true yard. The jail has a restricted area. The amendments prohibit anyone from throwing, otherwise causing to be dropped, thrown, or placed objects into that juvenile detention yard with or without a drone. So you can't lob contraband into the jail yard. We really never had an ordinance against that. This now takes care of that. It also enables our parks officials, our parks staff, to write tickets yet if someone is using a drone to interfere with wildlife, to harass wildlife. This has been a problem, and it's going to be an increasing problem with drones, going over an eagle nest or something like that and trying to provoke the eagle. So this gives our parks officials the ability to continue to write tickets. So I strongly urge us to get in compliance with the judge's rule, and we need to do something with our ordinance. And this follows what she said we can do and what we can't do with that ordinance. I've also filed an appeal with the Court of Appeals, but I'm limiting that argument to Ottawa County as a property owner. And remember, I started by saying that the Drone Act regulates cities, villages, and townships from regulating, prohibits regulation. It says nothing about schools, you as individual property owners, and your relationship to drones. So the argument in the Court of Appeals will be, did the regulation prohibition strip us as property owners from the ability to post a sign that says no trespass with drones over the jail property, period? Does it prohibit schools from saying no trespass with drones over our school property during school hours? I don't think so. And honestly, if that's what they intended, they have taken those property rights from us. In a recent Michigan Court of Appeals case held that a law enforcement agency cannot use a drone without a warrant to go over your property and take pictures. Well, if that's true, then property owners have rights, and we are a property owner. And just because we can't ordain and prohibit the use of drones, we should be able to post a sign that says, this is trespassing, and we can write a criminal trespass, sheriff's department can, criminal trespass ticket if you trespass with a zone. So that's a modification of our provision. I'm never going to come back to you, even if we went in the Court of Appeals and say we need to amend this ordinance again. This will basically preserve that part of Judge Miedema's opinion. But I do think there's a great argument that all property owners in Michigan have rights up to 400 feet where the FAA takes over. And they can regulate, you can regulate, I can regulate drone activity above the airspace over my property. And if not, let the Court of Appeals say that. And that is how we go back to the legislature and say, really, was that what you intended? That someone can use a drone over a school playground and take pictures of these children? So that's where we stand in this ongoing activity. We are a rule of law and we're adjusting to Judge Miedema, but we're also taking advantage of some of the things she said we can do. And as I said, what we will pursue in the Court of Appeals.
If you may, Mr. Van Essen, let's say an example that Jason just gave with the property across from the Eastmanville Farms. How would that affect that if someone pulled off the side of the road, brought their drone out and were flying it over that open field with no malice or intent for malice? Would that be seen as flying over county property, or would that be seen as there is no malice or harmful intent?
Well, right now, according to Judge Miedema, anyone can fly a drone anywhere over county property. Again, if you engage in noxious behavior, if you're harassing people in the Eastmanville farm area, if you're harassing wildlife, this ordinance would apply to that. But to your question, then it's the person being regulated from the noxious behavior that they're engaging in with drones. Drones are getting increasingly sophisticated, and the next war is going to be fought with a lot of drones flying in the air. So it is appropriate for the county to consider regulating noxious behavior with drones, and that's all we're doing. If I win the Court of Appeals case, then the county is going to have to post signs in areas that it truly wants to protect from drone usage. So back to your question, let's say we win as a property owner, we can prohibit drones over the Eastmanville farm. You may decide, that's an area where it's not really much of a trespass, so we don't care if we're to post the signs in that area and consider that to be a trespass zone. Those will be decisions you'll have to make in the future if we prevail in the Court of Appeals. All I'm asking the court to say is, as a property owner, you have some ability to say, I don't want drones flying over this part of my property.
I think, is it fair to answer his question that today, or if this gets adopted,
Doesn't affect that at all.
they could fly that drone over the property as long as they're not harassing people or wildlife?
Yep.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Van Essen?
Doug, I keep hearing that Amazon and other organizations are anticipating using drones to deliver stuff. So would this ordinance prevent Amazon from delivering our copy paper or whatever via drone?
As long as they don't fly over people who haven't consented, because that's a violation of federal law with a drone. Can't fly, it's not supposed to fly those things over people that haven't consented. That's the law right now.
Right.
Federal. As long as they're not harassing someone or wildlife, and then the answer would be no. Now, they can't drop a package in the jail yard that an inmate ordered. This would prohibit that. So that would be the only instance right now that would be covered by that. And I would expect it, when we get to that point,
Yeah.
FAA may adjust the 400 feet.
Yeah.
Or right now, they can fly at 400 feet. It's in the FAA's exclusive control. They go lower than that with an object or with the drone. And I think you're getting into individual property owner rights.
Okay. This past summer, I was over at my daughter's yard. I was doing some yard work for her and I found a drone in her yard that a neighbor apparently had lost control of. What should she have done with that drone?
Put it in the trash.
Yeah, well, I guess finders keepers. I mean, if
Yeah.
they didn't come forward, but it really,
What the
this is
owner
what's
of.
left of our case,
Mhm.
is to try to help property owners with those questions. Because right now, that's not, you hear anecdotally stories of people shooting a drone out of the sky in front of them. Do they have that right? That will be the question and if they don't, why did the Court of Appeals strike down that law enforcement activity? It doesn't seem to make sense that if a private citizen can come over your backyard and take a picture, that law enforcement can't. Right?
Yeah.
And so those are the questions we'll be asking the Court of Appeals to address. And we'll see how far they decide to go, or whether they'll even, how far they'll bite on analyzing some of these things. But that's what's left of our lawsuit, is to try to answer questions like that.
So let's say that we decided to, if the owner of that drone had come onto my daughter's property, he would have had to ask for permission to search for it or so forth, I would imagine.
Well, right now, under Michigan law on trespass, if you have signs that say don't come on, then you've restricted that kind of access. If you have a fence, you've declared that that's a zone of privacy, and to climb over the fence to get the drone would probably be a trespass. But right now, you have property rights and trespass that clearly apply to the person. Do they also apply to the drone? It's really what our lawsuit in the Court of Appeals will answer.
Okay.
And
Those are
what
all
Judge
good questions.
Miedema would say is, you can regulate that person from coming in, but you can't regulate the drone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question for you, Doug.
Yeah.
In regards to flying over county property, like Tunnel Park, Kirk Park, if the drone is 50 yards offshore, is that county property, or is county property stop at the shoreline, or?
Yeah, it stops at the shoreline. So this won't apply. This ordinance won't apply to that activity. Again, if they're flying over people who are bathing out
Right.
there, then that's a violation of federal law. And we could have the sheriff issue a ticket under federal law for that illegal activity. We stop with our property.
Okay.
And it only regulates activity with that drone. Taking pictures inside of a county facility is prohibited by this ordinance as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. We have a motion by DeYoung and a second by Bergman. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Holklord,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
No.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Meppeling,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the Senate bills, I move to approve and authorize the board chairperson and clerk register to sign the resolution opposing Senate bills 597 and 598.
We have a motion and we have support. Would you like to address this a little bit? I'd see that Lynn is also here.
Yeah, I know Lynn will come up. I just want to say that there's a series of bills, these two bills in the Senate, and then I think it's 4 bills in the House. The Senate bills are further along the process, and they're also sponsored by the Senate Majority Leader, Mike Shirkey, so they could have some legs here. And it would really take the legs out from under our CMH system, and it would essentially take our Medicaid revenue, hand it to private health insurers who would then provide these services, and there'd be really no public accountability for this. And since this is pending legislation, we do under our board rules have the ability to adopt resolutions in support of or in opposition to pending legislation. Lynn's here to maybe provide a little more detail and answer any questions you have. But in essence, we've met with Senator Shirkey once quite a few months ago. Right now, we're not getting the sense that that they're open to any meaningful changes that we would like to see. And I understand there's still a few senators short of advancing this. So right now, we've had good support from Senator Victory on this. And with respect to the House bills, those haven't moved as much. And we're open with speaking with the sponsor of those House bills to see if they can be amended in a way, that protects the consumers that we provide services for. So, Lynn.
I'm happy to answer any questions. John, I think you did a good summary of our concerns. If you support this resolution, you'll join more than 20 other boards of commissioners and several statewide organizations, including the Sheriff's Association, Michigan Association of Counties. There's quite a few groups that have passed similar resolutions. And I think it would send a very powerful message, not only to our legislators, but the governor's office and Senator Shirkey. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Commissioners?
I don't really have a question. I just have more of a statement that I do agree that these bills are a little bit aggressive in the move to the private sector, but I am somewhat in favor of a move in the private sector just to help kind of clear things up a little bit. So that was my statement.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, Commissioner Zylstra?
Yeah, this past summer, we had a policy on resolutions. We went a bit further in our board rules just past January. In spite of that, we've had a number of resolutions. This is our second. I fully support this. I look forward to voting for it in CMH next month. But I do think we need to, have a firm policy on resolutions that either we allow all resolutions or we allow no resolutions. I know we have differing opinions on what our language may apply to this one. I can only think of one instance where our policy and resolutions would allow us to vote on resolutions, and that would be is if the legislature is considering dissolving county boards. Other than that, I don't think there's any circumstance in which our language would permit a resolution of opinion. So I'll be voting present on this one. Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Mr. Shea, did you not say that you felt that this fell under our board policies correctly, in that it directly could affect our residents, could affect our money flow through in and out of?
I do believe it complies with our board rules. It's pending legislation that affects the operation, one of our operations that we do. And when we looked at, was it the mask or vaccine mandate? And at the time, I think we were looking at it to apply to just the resolution opposition to that. I believe was just for the federal. The original was federal because there was the Biden administration was proposing a federal vaccine mandate. And then there was discussion to talk about expanding that to the state or local, but there was no state or local proposal to have a vaccine mandate at that point. And that's why we came to the conclusion that that part of the resolution would be out of order. But since this is dealing with pending legislation that would impact the county and how its CMH provides services, this would comply with our board rules.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion on the floor and we have a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Present.
Mr. Terpstra.
No.
Mr. Meppeling.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding 911 service plan, I move to approve the proposed 911 service plan for Ottawa County and to schedule a final public hearing at least 90 days after approval.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor, second by Bergman. 90 days, would that put us somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe May 10th?
10th, I would suggest our May 10th meeting, our first meeting in May.
Okay, that's about 90 days.
And
If I could
Peter Waters from 911 or Central Dispatch is here to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, real quick, Pete McWaters, Central Dispatch. Good afternoon, Commissioners. When I took over in 2019, one of the things I looked at was our operations. And one thing I noticed was that we were operating under a 911 plan that was from 2001, 2002 era. So moving forward, while we don't foresee any drastic changes in service, we're not going to change our service district or who we dispatch for, how we operate that way. There's a lot of updates that need to take place in terms of technology. So I spoke with Doug Van Essen quite a bit about it. We worked hand in hand on it, and we would like to push this forward as an update to get us more modern and up to date with our 911 plan.
Questions, commissioners? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Kyers,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
and Mr. Fenske.
Yes,
Motion passes.
from Finance and Administration Committee, Commissioner Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022 budget adjustments, I make a motion to approve the 2021 and 2022 budget adjustments per the attached schedule.
Second.
Motion made by Baumann, second by Bergman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Dannenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Baumann,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink,
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra,
Yes.
Mr. Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Holtvluwer,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Regarding the use of ARPA funds for public safety payroll, I make a motion to approve the use of ARPA funds to pay approximately 11 million in public safety payroll from March 3, 2021 to December 31, 2021.
Second.
John, would you or Karen like to address this?
I'll give it a shot, and then everything I mess up, Karen will make sure she corrects for me. But as you know, we're going to receive about $57 million in ARPA funds. And one of the eligible uses for ARPA funds is to replace lost revenue. And if we have lost revenue, there's much less onerous reporting requirements and a little bit more flexibility on how we spend the funds. So the mechanism that we can do here is we can take about $11 million of ARPA money and use that to pay public safety payroll expenses from March of last year till the end of the year. So I think it was March 3rd through December 31st. It's about $11 million. And so the ARPA funds that would pay for that, we would take the resulting $11 million in general fund savings and put that in a separate account within the general fund that we would then use for one of those 5 buckets we talked about. And so we're going to set that money aside until the Board of Commissioners approves projects under one of those 5 buckets. And then that $11 million that we've pulled out and set aside, we would have far fewer onerous reporting requirements and a little more flexibility on how we spend that. But how we spend that would be recommended by the ARPA task force, then through the Finance Committee, and then ultimately through the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you. Karen, anything to add?
No, I think that pretty much covered it, except for I just say that the budget adjustments did include the full 19 million of lost revenue that was calculated for the year 12/31 of 20. So potentially we could identify expenses that qualify under the ARPA guidelines and do the full 19 million as the budget has outlined in the public safety area.
Commissioners?
Yeah, Karen, I just want to confirm, I think we've had a conversation on this, that the 11 million or the 19 million that we may eventually get to, that is still going to be part of the 57 million destined to expenditures within the 5 buckets, correct? Maybe restate that or?
No, I don't think you mistake.
Okay.
I think it's just, I don't want to get too technical, but I mean, we're going to submit 19 million of expenses under the ARPA grant.
Right.
And that savings that results, the board can dedicate a portion of those savings, can commit those savings, which this action item is savings that result, the board commits. At that point, it's not ARPA, but you're committing it to those same 5 buckets, those same initiatives. That's board action doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, to get out of the weeds a little bit, it would be part of that.
Okay, yeah, I think you got my question. I appreciate that, John. Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Mr. Chairman, on that note, just John and Karen, when we take the 11 and move it to cover air, if we were to do that, and now we replace that 11 in the buckets, do the same rules apply for how we decide from that ARPA committee, or does that give us more freedom to
We
use
have
that
more
money for other things?
flexibility on how we'll spend that 11 million. It'll still go through our process that the board approved.
Yep.
Through the ARPA task force, then through the finance committee, then through the board of commissioners. But in terms of the amount of restrictions on how we spend that becomes less.
Okay, they become general funds?
Right.
Committed general funds, board committed general funds
We're gonna
for
commit them
those 5
to-
buckets.
To those 5 buckets.
Right.
So
But
for
then once
example,
they're in that bucket, we've got more freedom of that money to, instead of being locked down to certain checkpoints that we need to do with each one, that
there
opens
will
up a
be
little bit
fewer
more
restrictions
Okay.
on how to spend it, but the board is saying we are going to spend it within these 5 buckets.
Sure. Okay. That answers my question.
Commissioner Kyers.
Does that regulate us when we word it like that? We're gonna put it in public safety payroll? Does that has to be designated for public safety payroll then, more or less?
so the final rule talks about public safety community support. It doesn't, we're going to create a project that is public safety payroll based on this agenda. So that will be how we spend our lost revenue to create the savings.
So we'll spend the ARPA funds, 11 million of it towards public safety payroll. We'll take the general fund savings that would have paid that payroll, take that general fund money out, set it aside to be used in one of those 5 buckets as determined by the Board of Commissioners.
So if down the road, if we can determine that if, like, say, the police department has a lot of overtime because of COVID, we could spend that money on there, justify
Out
it.
of the county bucket. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Other questions, commissioners? Seeing none, will you call the roll, please?
Sir, Mr. Kyers.
Yes.
Mr. Hoploor.
Yes.
Mr. Meppelink.
Yes.
Mr. Terpstra.
Yes.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung.
Yes.
Mr. Baumann.
Yes.
And Mr. Fenske.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Appointments, none. Discussion items, none. Report of the county administrator. Mr. Shea.
Thank you. So this is the first quarter update to our strategic and business plan. And just a couple updates. One, and I think Lynn she's still here, has brought this up before. There's obviously an increasing demand for CMH services, and we have a lot of open positions in CMH, and so we're having our challenges filling those positions. So that's an update, although that's not new news to you. We are implementing the state-funded groundwater monitoring network. And so Paul's department in strategic impact is working with the MEDC to provide the necessary information for that funding. I believe it was just over $1 million, and that disbursement will come in 2 parts. Half of it will come up front, and the other half will come up when we spend that first half. And we should be receiving that first half of the money within the next few months, and we've got to spend all of it by October of 2025. We're also collaborating with our local units to enhance new development practices and ordinances regarding water conservation. So the Groundwater Board has sent letters to our local units, mostly in the central areas of the county, just seeking their cooperation in reviewing and suggesting changes to their zoning ordinance that may impact the county's groundwater. So we're doing that on a cooperative, collaborative basis. And we're also pursuing and implementing new tools for farmland preservation. So they're working, Strategic Impact is working with our partners and community stakeholders to talk about succession planning among farmers, creating mentoring opportunities for farmers wanting to enter the farming industry, and doing some other GIS mapping layer efforts for them as well. And then you may have noticed that there's a new key, or actually I think it's 2 self-serve kiosks were installed in front of the clerk's office, and they're being programmed, and it's going to help our citizens apply for CPLs, marriage license, notary publics, and so forth. And then IT is engaged with Microsoft artificial intelligence suites and working with chat bots. So that's where, don't ask me any questions beyond this, but where you can ask the computer a question and it'll provide an answer, and the more questions it receives, the better it refines the answers. So we're working on those efforts. So those are the major updates from the strategic plan. A couple other just general updates. We had an initial meeting with Granger DLZ on our budget for the Family Justice Center. And we're looking at certain areas where we can cut costs to remain within the budget. And we think we can do that. With respect to ARPA, I know we just had a bit of conversation on that. The request for proposals to select our bucket managers has been posted, and those responses are due February 14th. And I think I mentioned at the last meeting, Senate Bill 694, which is to add a 5th Circuit Court judge. Obviously, that has passed the Senate, and that should be out of the House Judiciary Committee possibly today, and it would go to the House either later this week or next week. So we're pretty confident that that will pass. And then, as I mentioned to you, the federal vaccine or testing mandate that President Biden pushed through, the Supreme Court issued a ruling that said that the federal government does not have authority to do that, except for healthcare workers that work in facilities that receive Medicare and Medicaid funding. So we sent out, or I sent out an email to all the employees a little over a week ago stating, with the exception of CMH and public health employees, we will not be doing a mandatory vaccine or testing policy, but we will do it for CMH and public health. Because as we mentioned, if the Supreme Court upholds it, we will do it. Upon further review of that ruling, and in speaking with other public health departments and CMH service providers, our corporation counsel has given the opinion that that mandate for healthcare workers does not apply to our CMH or public health department. So accordingly, the county will not have its own vaccine or testing mandate. And so I've just let the employees know that today. So while we encourage vaccines and so forth, and I think that's the position of the board, we will not be mandating that. And I just wanted to give that's the, I guess, the significant change from 2 weeks ago. So.
Any further questions of Administrator Shea? Mr. Garcia?
John, is there a point, I know with the Family Justice Center, that there's concern about the cost going up because of materials and so forth. Is there a avenue or a formula where if we're going to have to cut back on the plans, that it doesn't equate more than what we currently have in our current juvenile center?
Yeah,
and eventually, I imagine we keep cutting, and we're going to be to where we are right now.
Yeah, and we went through some detailed stuff And no, so if I understand your question, we're not going to cut it to the point where what we're left with doesn't meet our needs. And then it's not even either we don't pursue the project at that point, or we have to look at increasing our budget at that point.
Okay.
I don't believe we're at that point yet.
Will we be gaining more than, obviously we'll gain more than what we currently have, but what we gain, will it justify the budget that we have budgeted for a new facility?
I believe so. And the things that we've looked at cutting so far are, I don't want to say that they're wants, but so, for example, we were looking at having 2 public elevators in the courtroom. We're going to having only 1, and maybe we'll do a build alternate for the 2nd public elevator. We only have 1 public elevator in Grand Haven. It's worked fine. And most of the foot traffic we get will be with Friends of the Court, which we're putting on the 1st floor on purpose to minimize stair traffic. And then unless code requires this and we're following up, do we need to fully screen the equipment on the roof? Because that's pretty expensive to do. So those are the things that won't really affect the operation. Those are the things that we're looking to try to reduce the cost. And then just, as they narrow down and the design and tighten it up, we may not need to have as high of a contingency as we did before when things were not as tightly designed as they are now. So we're not at the point where we're saying, oh, we need more money or we can't do this project. I think I'm still optimistic we can get there where we need to be.
Okay, and I guess I'm asking the question because I don't know how much involved we are in determining whether we're beyond that point of, is it really worth it? Is that something that the board will be informed of step by step? Because I guess I would hate to find out that we have gone ahead and built this and we only gained a little bit here and a little bit there, and that we really weren't walked through the whole process or had a say as to whether, we've reached that point where maybe it's just a little bit.
I had a very similar question that you asked that Kevin Bowling, our recently retired circuit court administrator, and he actually expressed some frustration, and it wasn't a question asked by any of you, but he felt that the way it's currently designed right now will meet not only the current needs of the court system and FOC, but also the future needs as well. And so when we can get this budget to where we need it to be, we'll be coming back to the Board of Commissioners because there'll be some bond resolutions to deal with. You can see the budget, you can see the drawings and so forth of all that. So that is yet to come before the board, and it will come before the board.
But it sounds like, John, you're not cutting square footage. It's just things that, like you said, are.
Yeah, I don't think we can really cut square.
versus-
Yeah, we don't. If we're getting into cutting square footage, then that's going to be a problem, to be frank. So no, we're not doing that.
If I could just add one thing quickly, the whole benefit of IPD is about to be realized because the major players on this project, if they don't bring it into budget, they lose their profit.
All right.
So while in a normal construction project, they have an incentive during construction to get more purchase order, change orders and things like that. This is tightly controlled. They have an incentive to bring it under budget. And the more they bring it under budget, the more profit they make. The other thing is we have 7% now for contingency. We're thinking of in the final budget having only 5%, but it may make some sense to take some of the ARPA funds in the county bucket and reserve them for this project, because if we go over 5%, it's only because of the supply chain problems caused by COVID that would be driving material prices up, which are really the only legitimate change orders that would increase the budget from where you set it, would be unexpected material changes. And if you're concerned, Frank, that 5% or 7% may not be enough because of COVID, then it may make sense to reserve a little bit of that COVID money to make sure we don't have to use general funds to augment that COVID related materials increase. Our labor will be set.
Commissioner Zales.
Yeah, just, I mean, just a question, I guess. I mean, there's no guarantee that IPD process or no, that we'll get bids at $30 million, right? I mean, it doesn't seem like the
No, they've
IPD
already
project is
been-
not magical that all of a sudden we're gonna get the bid that we want just because we have IPD, right?
No, they're
I mean,
committing.
we could easily find somebody who's
No, they've
not gonna
already,
bid at 30 regardless of how we structure it.
no, they've committed to this cost. Now, so 60% of it is at labor costs and materials costs, which have already been baked into the IPD budget. The only things that are being bid are drywall, cement, and excavating. Those may be higher than anticipated and will come out of the 5% contingency. But most of the trades and Granger's fees are set. They bid, they won, that's their commitment. So the target cost that you will set is much more advanced than it would otherwise be pre-let in a traditional project. They're committing to build this at their cost as audited. And they're committing to that cost with the profit that's going to be put in there. And if they can't do it within that, they do it for nothing. Yeah.
Okay.
Where we at with the process of, let's step in with hiring a new administrator? Are we, where we at with that, John?
And I haven't been a part of that process,
Not
but
part of it. I'll mention, well, I can give it right now. Where we are is, we are meeting soon with 3 potential candidates, and we'll hopefully be able to come back with a report at our next meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Roger.
Okay. General information, comments and meetings attended. Mr. Dion.
Yes, I'd just like to concur what you started the meeting with today in regard to the first ever Ottawa newsletter. I've probably had a dozen people that I've talked to. It's been extremely well received. I really want to commend staff here that worked on that letter. It's just a lot of information in there. A couple people made a suggestion how we could maybe improve it a little bit, maybe a few more. And these come from some people that don't have the internet, okay? But they still have their cell phones, whatever. Maybe some more phone numbers in that brochure where they can connect with different things. One person in particular liked the veterans article in there, and we had a phone number in the veterans article. So very, very well received. And I just, I commend everybody who worked on it. And I know some of them are still in the mail system going out, but I thoroughly enjoyed what it was and how it was put together.
well, we appreciate the updates from some of the commissioners on what they wanted in there, and just a special shout out to Shannon Feldner. She did a great job putting that newsletter together.
Yes, she did.
Any other comments from commissioners? Do you want to take a walk for warrant? Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, just want to remind everybody, Saturday, February 5 is the annual Walk for Warmth. It's at City on the Hill in Zealand. It's at 8:30. I know that Commissioner Dannenberg has participated with this. I've done it a couple different times. It's just a great, fun morning. It's just a nice brisk walk. Almost everybody can do it. It's a good fundraiser for the Community Action Partnership, and it's good fellowship, good time out. And so I would encourage you to take a look at the Walk for Warmth and show up if you can.
Excellent. Before we adjourn, before we go to public comment, Do we want to take a break after public comment and go into the workshop, or do you want to go just directly into the workshop?
Few minutes.
3 minutes? Okay. 5 minutes. Okay, do you want to do our last opportunity for public comment?
Sir, we do have two online public comments through Zoom.
Okay.
It's an appropriate time.
Sure.
So we have Carrie. And I'm going to, I think Madison, you're going to have to unmute Carrie. Okay. And you have 3 minutes. If you could just state your name and the jurisdiction that you're from.
Oh, thank you. Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Carrie Corpy. I'm from Grand Haven, the city of Grand Haven. I'm a retired teacher from Jenison, and I volunteer at the Momentum Center in Grand Haven, where we help people with that are mentally challenged, physically challenged, and have addictions that need support. I'm just so thankful to be a citizen here in Ottawa County. It's a beautiful place, and I am thankful for the work you are all doing. It's a hardworking county made up of communities of people who value and help each other. Many of us have a small bit of anxiety or fear when we maybe meet someone different than us. And the truth is we're all different, right? And our differences enrich our lives. I'd like to zoom in on this issue of humanity when it comes to the DEI office, diversity, equity, inclusion. We have the good fortune of housing this in order to help us learn, work, and live together. I think I'm just so thankful for that. And I feel that instead of fighting to keep this office, the right thing to do is to actually thank all the members of the DEI office. They, along with all of you, are in the forefront of our future. And in the words of your DEI statement, our DEI statement, they help us engage and understand a variety of perspectives across all human differences, especially at a time now when new historical truths are starting to show their faces. We need to continue to learn and use the best practices that our DEI office has for us, and in order to move ahead. Our kids and grandkids are the beneficiaries of all of your hard work. It's so interesting to hear your work on the park systems and everything that we're so grateful for around our county. I really applaud you all. But to progress, we need to acknowledge that the upcoming generations, I believe, citizens believe that people are created worthy and valuable, all people are, and our differences enrich our lives and never ought to make us feel degraded or less than anyone else. So in summary, our experiences are different and our histories are rich. So let's learn from this richness. We know that DEI advocacy is an important piece of the puzzle for our economic growth and our stability in Ottawa County. So let's be grateful for our DEI office and how they, along with all of you, are leading us into a wonderful future where indeed everyone does belong. Thank you for all of your service.
Thank you, Carrie.
Next public comment is from Harvey Nickel. Harvey, if you could just unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes, and if you could state your jurisdiction as well.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
You sound kind of muffled, Harvey.
Can you hear me now?
A little better, a little better.
Okay.
Can you work on it a little bit more?
Thank you. My name is Harvey Nickel. I live at 7513 23rd Avenue in Jamison. The citizens of Ottawa County and this country are experiencing an unconstitutional, tyrannical overreach by state and federal government agencies, blatant censorship of big tech in the media, wholesale malpractice by medical professionals and hospitals, and endless propaganda from the mainstream media. In 2012, Obama quietly signed into law H.R. 4310, allowing propaganda to be used on the citizens of the United States by its own government, making it perfectly legal for the media to purposely lie to the American people. The mainstream media pumps out the propaganda, and the big tech censors anyone who voices a dissenting view of their narrative. If you listen to mainstream media, CDC, NIH, FDA, and the WHO, the health departments, all you hear is get the vaccine. It's safe and effective. They do not tell you that there are more deaths from the COVID vaccine than from all other vaccines over the last 30 years. The VAERS site now lists over 22,000 deaths, 11,000 heart attacks, 27,000 cases of myocarditis, and 39,000 permanently disabled. These are self-reported numbers, so multiply by at least 20 to get the actual numbers. So now please, please view the video by Senator Ron Johnson's hearing on January 24th, 2022. It's called COVID-19, A Second Opinion. You will find the 5-hour video on Rumble because YouTube and Facebook have censored it. You will hear doctors, lawyers, nurses, and scientists who all have been censored because they're telling the truth. You will hear how hospitals are denying patients treatments that have saved millions of lives around the world, and how the approved hospital protocols that use remdesivir and ventilators are killing patients. You will hear how family members are not allowed to see their loved ones and to advocate for their treatment. You will hear testimonies about how death and damage is being done by the shots that do not stop infection or transmission of the virus. After you watch the video, confront Lisa Stefanowski and the other decision makers of the Ottawa County Health Department with this information and demand that they all stop the mask and vaccine mandates, especially for children. Demand that the hospitals stop using remdesivir and to start using successful treatments like ivermectin, HCQ, budesonide, and the protocols of the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. If they do not comply with your demands, you need to step up for the citizens of this county and fire all of them and replace them with people who will follow the Constitution and make decisions that actually improve the health of the citizens of the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Our next public comment is from Ronalyn. And again, Ronald, if you could just state your first and last name and the jurisdiction you're from, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Ronnie Allen from Allendale. I don't have much to say today. I just was listening in, and I know you can't answer the question, or maybe you can, but I was overhearing because I'm working. I usually do these. I'm usually working during the meeting time. I've come to some in person, but I just was listening in, and I think I heard in between calls that the health department there doesn't fall under the CMS mandate. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate, underscore, and clarify that. So the nurses and the directors at the local health department for public health are not mandated to get vaccines, even though almost every other entity, healthcare entity, that obviously Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement is pretty much the biggest payer, is mandated to vaccinate. Just want a clarification on that. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all of the online public comment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Anyone from the audience want public comment at this point? Okay. Seeing none, we're adjourned. We'll officially call the Ottawa County Board Workshop to order for Tuesday, January 25th. The agenda is as follows. Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Garcia. Here. Mr. Baumann. Here. Mr. Zylstra.
Oh, here, sorry.
Mr. Dannenberg.
Here.
Mr. Meppeling.
Here.
Mr. Terpstra.
Here.
Mr. Holfleur.
Present.
Mr. DeYoung.
Here.
Mr. Kyers.
Here.
Mr. Bergman.
Here.
And Mr. Fenske.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Public comments and communications from staff. Okay. Seeing none, we'll go right into our work session item. And this is the 2021 Community Assessment for Ottawa County. It's going to be presented by Patrick Moran, President of Ottawa County and Allegan United Way. Welcome, Pat.
Hello there. How is everybody?
Good.
Can you all hear me okay? Oh, look at that. That's pretty good. So the community assessment itself, first, let me tell you, I opened my mail the other day and there was this really cool newsletter in it. And I thought, I've never seen one of these before. And then I come here and you say it's a new newsletter. So I'm glad I just didn't not notice it before. I read it from cover to cover. I must admit, I then recycled it, but it was really good. I was really impressed. So thanks for doing that. I always read the parks one and I thought this was it for a minute. And then I was like, what's all of this stuff in here? Pretty cool.
Thank you.
So the community assessment is 500 pages of data that we boil down into little sections. We boil it down into education, financial stability, health, basic needs. And this year, a new section called welcoming communities. So I'm not going to give you the 2-hour assessment. I'm just going to give you the welcoming communities because that was the specific thing that you guys were interested in. And you promised me, Madison, that it would work if I push that button. So I'll let you do it. You can we'll just do the slide thing. Okay. She said, don't point it at anything, and I'm pointing it anyway. There we go. Yep, thank you. And one more. One more, Madison. You can't get good help nowadays. Yeah, Madison and I have worked on other stuff. She knows I'm just teasing her. Yay! Have I ever told you how good Madison is?
Yeah.
Okay, so just as things that you already know, right? Let's look at the Ottawa County population by race. You can see, of course, that the southwest part of the community is still the largest percent of population and the largest landmass. You can see that the northwest is growing. That middle bit, people ask me, why do you pull out your data so you can disaggregate it across that orange bit in the middle? And I say it's because of young, poor, incredibly healthy people called students. It messes with my data. It includes Grand Valley State University and it skews all of the data. So about 10 years ago, we started to pull it out and called it a central population, even though we all know that's not that whole orange thing is not a population center. It just really messes with our data. So we pull it out.
Patrick, can I stop you a minute?
Please do.
How does the map go beyond the county line?
Because a lot of the data we do is on zip code or municipality.
Okay.
And as you all know, the city of Holland crosses over into Allegan County.
Right.
The other reason is we run both counties.
Northwest, so you're including Fruitport and part of Norton Shores?
That's a really great question. You mean the red bit that's sticking up?
Yep.
It looks like that is in the zip code. Yeah, because of the crossover.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can disaggregate it into the county, but we normally disaggregate it by population center instead of that kind of thing. Yeah. So what you can see here is that I moved to town in 1988. I live in Grand Haven, still live out there. And when we did our first census there, it was 98.6% white in Grand Haven. And I think over 90% white in the county. So even though some people would look at the white alone bottom bar there and say, boy, that's a pretty undiverse community, it is actually moving in the right direction, just not very fast. And as you'll see in a little while, not evenly across the county. You probably love this data. I know I do because it shows that we're growing. So Ottawa County itself grew in every municipality that we measure. So not only is it growing and growing incredibly fast, it's growing absolutely everywhere. So the darker green there shows the fastest growth, the lighter green shows the slowest growth, but it's all growth. In fact, a 12.3% increase since the last census. Why is this important? Because if we're not welcoming as a community, then we are going to become less diverse instead of more diverse. So welcoming communities becomes very important when you're growing as fast as we are. This is, has anybody seen this? This is the dot map. It's called the racial dot map. So every one of those blue dots is a white individual, green are black individuals, red Asian, and the orange or yellow, depending what your tennis ball theory is there, is the Hispanics. So what you can see is that there is enormous amounts of segregation in the United States. When we look at that for the southwest part of our county, we can see that there are also areas where different populations, different ethnicities either have chosen to live or have systemic barriers in the way that make that a place where they will live on every different colored dot. If you look at the northwest Ottawa County, you'll see they have the same problem. It actually, you can very easily see the red dots there. The interesting thing for the northwest part of the county is there are almost no non-blue dots. It's a very, very white community in the northwest. This is the most important slide in here, and this is the thing I want to leave you with, although there's a lot more data to go over. Every time we do a community assessment, as I said, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages of data, but we always start it with what we call a key informant survey. You would all have received this key informant survey. Hopefully you all filled out the key informant survey. And next time it comes, if you didn't, you better, because it's coming out in the community. And what we do is we ask about 120 community leaders what the pressing and prevalent issues are in Ottawa County according to them. So it's not proprietary data. It's not relative to the whole county, but we want to hear in case there's something bubbling up that's emerging, that's not actually in the data yet. And for the first time ever, and I've been doing this personally for 15 years, for the first time ever, that big blue arrow, a more inclusive community, accepting of all residents, welcoming of all cultures with less discrimination, that celebrates diversity, made the list at all, and it debuted at number 3. That's a big deal. That means the leaders in Ottawa County believe that the concept of a welcoming community, which is our bucket name, right? All of those things that are inside of it, we just call it a welcoming community, is all of a sudden massively important. As I said earlier to Roger, there's as many questions that we'll have as actual data that we're presenting, because the welcoming communities presentation is a thought-provoking presentation. It's not meant to educate you on deep data. So because of that, it actually became a think tank of itself. Normally, guess what pops up? Education, financial stability, health, and basic needs. So we put think tanks together. This time we put a think tank together for welcoming communities. And we also had, excuse me, household survey questions that are statistically significant, that do go out to thousands and thousands of county residents. And this document is available in its entirety. There are about 12 pages of tables, but you probably don't want to see all of them today. So I'm going to give you some highlights. One of the highlights here is we asked, do you agree or strongly agree that it was a Likert scale? So 68% of people said that they agreed or strongly agreed that their community is inclusive and welcoming. Nothing about them, just do you think your community is welcoming? 68% said yes. If your kid comes home from their math test and you say, how did you do? And they said, I got a 68. Would you be excited? It's not exciting data. Now it's baseline data, right? So 3 years from now, we're going to ask this question again. But as baseline data, it's not great. But one of the things we do at United Way every time with a data point is we disaggregate it. We say, how do the young people feel about this? How do the older generation feel about this? How are whites answering it? How are they answering it in the southwest quadrant compared to the northwest quadrant? And then our data people, the people a lot smarter than me, they break out things that are interesting, things that stuck out to them. So you can see here, the Hispanic population says 86% of them say that their community is inclusive and welcoming of all people. Other, which are because we have such low populations of the other ethnicities, they said that only 43% are welcome. So we did a little digging on this. And although, as I say, it's not scientific data, we did some exploration on this. And we believe from the answers that we were given, it's because the Hispanic population is talking about their own community, that they are not deeply enmeshed into the white community. When they answered that 86% of them felt that their community was welcoming, they were talking about the Hispanic community. Now, these are anecdotal discussions and interviews with people based on the data. That kind of makes sense. The interesting thing is when we asked those other populations, Asian and Black, that are in the broader white community, because they don't have as many people to live with, they felt that they weren't welcome. Now, again, more questions than answers, but that is a fascinating community perspective from the mouths of the people in the community. The next one, and we won't go through every single one of these, but 86% agreed or strongly agreed they felt included in their community, included and welcome. So they're not talking about, is it welcoming? They're saying, am I welcomed? And 94% of the Northeast quadrant said, yes, we're very welcomed. 82% of the Southwest quadrant said, I feel welcomed. Statistically different enough for the data people to put it in, that the Northwest felt different to the Southwest. If you don't see a data point here, it's because it's not a statistical difference from the other answer. And 70% of the respondents agreed or strongly agreed that their community welcomes people of all cultures and beliefs at town-sponsored activities and events. This was very interesting to our municipal friends. And the differences there were mostly in age groups. That people in an older age group answered 58% said, yes, I completely agree that we welcome all people. And people in the 18 to 34-year-old answered that at 75%. So again, what this slide tells me, just as an example of the 5 pages of tables, is that your age, where you live, and your ethnicity change your answer, even though we're supposed to be living a shared experience. We all live in Ottawa County, we all live in our own town, but the experience we're having on the same question is radically different. Just one more set here. We said, in your opinion, which people or groups of people do you feel are not included and welcome? So we kind of went to the other side of it and said, who's not welcome? And 41% of the entire population said minorities are not welcome. But when we break that subgroup out, white answers, white respondents were at 44% said minorities were not welcome, compared to in the Northeast section, 67%, and the Hispanic population, 72%. Again, same question, same community, radically different interpretation of that question, not of the question, but radically different feeling. We're going to go all the way over to the LGBTQ plus group. This was one of the areas where we really didn't have a lot of data as to whether this welcoming community translates beyond ethnicity into those areas. And we found that, again, very, very different. Higher income said that LGBTQ plus were not welcomed. Lower income said they were welcomed. So again, if you just look at why does your income change your answer? Why does your ethnicity change your answer? Why does your age change your answer? And why does where you live change your answer? It's because there are radically different experiences depending on who you are in Ottawa County. I'm not going to go through these, but these are the actual data tables. So there's about 5 pages of these that you can look at. If you want to see the deeper data, it's all on unitedway.org on our community assessment.
Hey, Patrick,
Yep.
On the income portion, then, is it fair to say that the higher income, then the less welcoming you are? Is that what that means?
They felt that that group was less welcome.
Okay.
Just fascinating to me that your income would change your answer in the same community. Normally, when I give data, I can give you a decade's worth of programming behind it and what we've done. This is not true for this thing. It just popped up again this year in our study. So this is particularly, so then there's this deeper study that goes just into ask migrant farm workers the same kinds of questions. So this part of the study is just on migrant farm workers. And it's sometimes eye-opening to see that 72% of the farm workers that come into the community are seasonal, but 28% are not seasonal. They're considered migrant farm workers, but they're a full part of our community. They're here permanently. When asked how long had they lived here, for those that answered that they were year-round, some of them have been here 20 years. 20% of them, in fact, have been here 20 years. And when we ask the seasonal workers, how long have you been coming? 24% had been coming more than 11 years. So if we consider that we want to be a welcoming community, people who come here every year for 20 years need to be considered a part of the community, in my opinion, and must be part of a welcoming community. Again, there's data on here. We're not going to go through every one. So this was to those farm workers. What kind of barriers do you find as being a part of Ottawa County? And we asked, do you find it hard to deal with stuff such as errands and shopping because you have difficulty speaking English? And it was about 50-50. It was 47 to 53. That language is a barrier. Have you ever been discriminated against? 89% said no. 11% said yes. I like the swing of those numbers, but to think that 11% of the people who consider this their home for at least part of the year feel discriminated against means that there are some issues there as this group goes into the broader population. We asked, where did you experience that discrimination? And I'm just going to let you read all of those instead of read them off to you and say that employers, the employer one surprised us and the landlord one surprised us. Okay. There was also a racial equity evaluation done in 2020 by a group that wasn't United Way, but we think it's very good data. And it talked about, has your racial identity, so this is no longer the migrant workers, this is the general population. Has your racial identity impacted your experience in your current workplace? And you can see it's another Likert scale there from not much on the left-hand side to extremely on the right-hand side. And we feel that this data is very leaning towards, yes, my racial identity has impacted my experience in the workplace. Has your racial identity impacted your career mobility within your organization? So have you been able to progress in your own organization? And although this was kind of all over the place, not a trend, we were concerned at how it spiked up a little bit towards extremely. So just a quick overview of pages and pages and pages of data. Normally what United Way likes to do when we put our data out, it's a data point we've been tracking for 12 to 20 years. We've been working on programming. The reason we track that data is to see if we're getting better, if we're getting worse, what works, what doesn't work. When this popped up as the number 3 issue in Ottawa County, we looked at our partners, we looked at your DEI office, we looked at LEADER, we looked at ACEH, all of those people that we work with. And of course, all of those groups said, yeah, we knew this, but what we haven't gone to yet, and I think that you can help with this, is the kind of programming that we can then come back to this data and say, did this get better? Because that's the point of the kind of work that we do. And I know based on what it says right on the door, that you guys are interested in a welcoming community. I'd love to take questions. Please know that that's the fastest summary of a very big document. But I was warned that after a session, you did not want to do an hour of data. Questions, thoughts, comments? Al.
Back to the first part of it. It says agree or strongly agree that your community is inclusive or welcoming of all people. The white are saying that we're only 68%.
68% feel that it's, agree that it's a welcoming community, yeah.
But there's also 32% saying that it's not, right?
Yeah, so if someone said to me, I scored 68 on a positive thing, I wouldn't be very happy about it.
No.
Yeah.
And yet the Hispanic said it was 86. Did that surprise the?
It surprised us until we went into the interview section, and we felt that they were talking about an inclusive community. So they're talking about that they live on streets where all of their neighbors are Hispanic. They live in neighborhoods that are all Hispanic, and they say, yeah, my neighborhood's super inclusive, super welcoming. The people who were living spread out, spread out, and that's like 3 times now. The people who lived spread out in the white community, which is 86%, said, no, I'm not very welcome at all. So what we've done is we've said, for you to feel welcome, you actually have to be segregated. That's my take on it. For you to feel welcome in our community, you have to be segregated. I'm up with people that look, act, think, speak like you do.
Thank you.
You know, Patrick, prior to you explaining that, that was my first thought.
Yeah.
When I saw that 86%, I'm thinking, right, and they're a little community.
Yep.
Basically.
Yep.
Because that group,
yeah,
my group, will likely stay with that group and in that group and not wander out, even into downtown Collins.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point because, you know, my English heritage, on a Saturday, you can find me and 30 other English people at the Curragh watching the football. You know, it's like an inclusive community, but it's actually exclusive of hockey players. Like we don't have any hockey players come. So a funny analogy, but is that the kind of community we want? And if it isn't the kind of community we want, how do we break those barriers down? And if it is, how do we integrate our communities? Because people do tend to go to what they know, what they like, what they're interested in. You won't find me at a hockey game. Another one I'll throw out that's just like that was the one that we asked about, have you found barriers at your workplace? There were white respondents that said, my ethnicity has caused me problems in the workplace to advance. And that's a whole new ball game to, you know, we were shocked when we saw that because we thought it would be minorities that said, I've had trouble advancing in my workplace because of my ethnicity.
Patrick, on the farm workers, when do they stop being a farm? I mean, a migrant farm worker.
Yeah.
When do they stop being a migrant farm worker? If they've been here for 20 years.
I'll bet you there's people in this room that actually know the answer to that better than I do. Unfortunately, that's not my study, it's somebody else's, and I don't work directly in that area. That's a really great question. Does anybody know what the definition of a permanent resident migrant worker is?
You know, I can tell you, Patrick, that even having graduated from U of M and having been a migrant and having been out of the migrant, I stopped referring to myself as a migrant. Well, I haven't, basically. I was meeting with a group of neighbors a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling them I used to live in migrant housing, and they were just appalled. You actually came from a migrant family, but I know that when I went to the University of Michigan, I told people I had dirt underneath my fingernails from being out on the field on Saturday night and walking onto campus on Sunday morning. And that stays with you. Stays with you.
It could be a self-identified response. Plus, just because they live here year round, they haven't gone to other work. They're still working that industry. So they would be in that physical location for the survey.
I think some of it too, Joe, working with a lot of them like that, some of them just, they never get their citizenship. They just don't. You know, they live here and they just never get they go back every so often. And so they aren't citizens of the United States.
So Phil, you know, Dale Heffy, that he has a lot of migrant workers.
Yeah.
Many of them work all year round.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's a good question to ask him someday. They ever consider themselves a non-migrant if they've worked for them for 10 years, for instance?
I think it just be just, they just don't get their citizenship. And I see some of them trying and they have a fear that they're not going to get it. They're going to have some little thing wrong. Yeah. That's what I see when I work with them all the time.
I'm here all day. So you keep asking and Roger will, I'm sure, tell us when we're out of time.
No, actually, this guy was.
There you go.
You're out of time.
That does not hurt my feelings at all. So we're good. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
Public comments. Okay, seeing that there's no public comments, we're adjourned.